Okay, so get this right. Like, imagine you're about to grab a snack, something bright red, maybe a candy, or even some yogurt. What if I told you that color, that vibrant red, could be linked to some, well, pretty serious stuff happening inside your body?
DNA damage.
Yeah,
You ever talk about red 40, that food dye you see everywhere?
exactly. And we're not just speculating here, right? We're diving deep into a scientific study from the University of South Carolina, legitimate stuff. This wasn't just some tiny experiment either. It was funded by the National Institutes of Health.
Oh, yeah, and they published it in a respected journal, too, called Toxicology Reports.
So this is the real deal. They really wanted to see what this red 40 does, especially in our guts. And they didn't just mess around with cells in a dish.
No, they actually study the effects of red 40 in living mice. Gives you a much better idea of what could be happening in, well, us, humans.
Right, because let's be honest, it's not like red 40 is some rare ingredient we barely ever encounter.
You're telling me. The study actually pointed out that something like 94% of people over the age of 2 in the USA consume red 40 regularly. And get this, over 40% of foods marketed to children in the USA contain these dyes.
That's a lot of people and a lot of kids being exposed to this stuff. Kind of makes you wonder what it does to us over time.
Well, that's exactly what the researchers were trying to figure out. And one of the things they found that's pretty concerning is that red 40 can actually cause damage to DNA. They saw it in both human cells and in the mice.
Wait, hold on. DNA damage, that sounds serious.
It is. Think of DNA as the instruction manual for your cells. When that manual gets damaged, things can go wrong. And one of the biggest worries is that it can increase the risk of developing cancer.
So even though red 40 might not directly cause cancer, this DNA damage thing is definitely not something to ignore.
Nope, not at all. And it's not just DNA damage either. The researchers also found that when the mice consumed red 40 for a long time, especially when they're also eating a high-fat diet, it caused inflammation in their guts.
We always hear that inflammation is bad, but can you remind us why that is, especially when it comes to our guts?
Sure. Think of your gut like a delicate ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Everything needs to be in balance for it to work the way it should. When there's inflammation, it's like throwing a wrench into the works. It can mess with your digestion, weaken your immune system, and even affect your mood. And chronic or long-term inflammation has been linked to an increased risk of many serious diseases.
Okay, so we've got DNA damage, we've got inflammation. The study also looked at something called the microbiome, right? I know we hear a lot about gut health these days. Can you explain what the microbiome is and why it's important?
Oh yeah, the microbiome is fascinating. Think of it as a community of trillions of tiny organisms, mostly bacteria, that live in your gut. They actually play a huge role in your overall health, helping you digest your food, producing certain vitamins, and even influencing your immune system.
So it's like this whole little world living inside of us. What did the study find about how red 40 affects that world?
Well, they found that red 40, particularly when combined with a high-fat diet, messed with the balance of bacteria in the mice's guts. Now, a diverse microbiome, meaning lots of different types of good bacteria, is generally a good thing. But red 40 seemed to disrupt that diversity, which could make the gut less healthy overall.
So it sounds like the high-fat diet is a big part of this. Why is that?
Good question. You see, a high-fat diet, especially one heavy on processed foods, can already be tough on the gut. It can cause inflammation and stress on its own. Then, when you add red 40 to that mix, it's like adding fuel to the fire. The negative effects seem to get even worse.
Like a double whammy for your gut. The high-fat diet sets the stage, then red 40 comes in and makes things worse.
Exactly. The study really points to the bigger picture here, right? It's not just about avoiding one specific ingredient. It's about creating a healthy environment in our gut through our diet and lifestyle.
Makes sense. So red 40 could be a factor in DNA damage, inflammation, and messing with the microbiome. It's starting to sound kind of alarming. But before we jump to conclusions, let's dig a little deeper into how red 40 might be causing these problems.
Well, one interesting finding was related to how red 40 might actually be mutating some genes that are important for preventing cancer. They look specifically at a gene called P53, which acts as kind of like a guardian, protecting cells from becoming cancerous.
So P53 is the good guy, trying to keep things under control. What did they find about red 40 in this gene?
It turns out red 40 seems to mess with P53's ability to do its job. They found that it actually caused mutations in this gene, making it less effective at protecting against cancer.
Okay, that's not good. But is red 40 like damaging all genes? Or is it more targeted?
Ah, good question. It highlights how complex this issue is. They also looked at another gene called APC, which is involved in cell growth and preventing cancer. Interestingly, they didn't find the same mutations in that gene.
So it's not just creating widespread chaos in our DNA. It seems to affect certain genes more than others.
Exactly. And that's why we need more research to fully grasp the long-term consequences of Red 40 exposure. But these findings definitely suggest that we need to be more aware of what we're putting into our bodies.
Absolutely. This is bigger than just Red 40. It's about being aware of all the ingredients in our food and making choices that support our health instead of potentially harming it. But before we get into that, there's one more interesting detail from the study I want to touch on.
It was about the mice, wasn't it?
Yeah, the study found that when the mice ate the Red 40, it actually dyed their insides red.
It did, yeah. Their intestines and tissues were stained red.
Kind of creepy, don't you think? I mean, if it's doing that to them, what's it doing to us?
It's definitely something that makes you think. And it does make you wonder how it's interacting with our bodies, on a physical level.
So we've got DNA damage, we've got inflammation, we've got microbiome disruption, and now we have creepy red insides. It's really starting to sound like Red 40 isn't something we want in our bodies.
Yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern. And these findings have definitely stirred up a lot of debate about whether Red 40 and other artificial food dyes like it should be more strictly regulated.
So some people think there should be stricter rules about how much Red 40 is allowed in food.
Exactly. Some experts believe that these dyes don't have any nutritional value at all, and that the potential health risks, especially for kids, are just not worth it.
That makes sense. What are the arguments against stricter regulations then?
Well, some industry groups and regulatory bodies argue that Red 40 is safe at the levels currently allowed in food. They point to studies that haven't found clear evidence of harm at those levels.
So it's a bit of a back and forth, right? Between those worried about the risks and those who say it's safe.
It is, yeah. And that's where being aware as a consumer really matters. When people know about these potential risks, they can make their own choices and even push for change.
So what can we do? Should we just completely avoid any foods with Red 40 in them?
That's one way to go, but I know it's not always easy or even realistic. The good news is there are things we can do to lower our exposure without having to completely change our diets.
Okay, like what? Give us some practical tips.
Well, the first thing is to become a label detective. When you're at the store, take a little extra time to really read the ingredient list on products. Look for things that use natural colors instead of artificial dyes.
I have noticed some products saying things like colored with beet juice or no artificial dyes. That's good, right?
Absolutely. Those are the ones to look for. It's really good to see more companies responding to what consumers want: cleaner ingredients.
But what about those times when we can't completely avoid processed foods? Any other strategies we can use?
Well, a good rule of thumb is to focus on whole, unprocessed foods as much as you can. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, and seeds.
Those are all naturally colorful, right? No need to add extra dyes to those.
Exactly. And they're full of nutrients that support good health.
Okay, so read labels, choose natural dyes when we can, and eat more whole foods. That feels doable.
It is. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference over time.
This whole Red 40 thing makes me wonder about other stuff that's added to our food. Are there other ingredients we should be paying attention to?
That's a great question. It's a whole other topic we could dive into. The world of food additives is complicated, and there's a lot of discussion about whether certain ingredients are really safe or not.
So basically, we need to educate ourselves more about what's actually in the food we're eating.
I think so, yeah. And it's not just about knowing what the ingredients are. It's about understanding how they might be interacting with our bodies and maybe affecting our health.
So where do we even begin?
There's a lot of good information online and in libraries. You can always talk to your doctor or a registered dietitian, too, to get some more personalized advice.
Right, so do your research, ask questions, stay informed.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you know about what you're eating, the better decisions you can make for yourself.
I like that. That's a great point. But before we wrap things up here, there's one more thing I want to bring up. The role of government agencies in regulating food additives.
Ah, you're talking about places like the FDA.
Right, exactly. What's their process for making sure these additives are safe?
Well, in the U.S., the FDA is responsible for keeping our food supply safe. They have a pretty detailed process for evaluating food additives, including things like Red 40.
What does that process involve?
It usually involves looking at scientific data, doing risk assessments, and setting what they call acceptable daily intake levels for each additive.
So they're trying to figure out how much of something is okay to eat every day?
Right. They're looking for potential short-term and long-term effects.
I've also heard some people criticize the FDA's process. What are some of the concerns?
Some experts are worried that the FDA relies too much on data provided by the food industry, which could be a conflict of interest.
That's a good point. If the industry is funding the research, you always wonder about bias.
Exactly. And some people argue that the FDA standards for safety are outdated and don't really consider the long-term effects of these additives, especially for children.
So maybe there's room for improvement when it comes to regulations.
Well, there's always room for improvement, right? And this is another area where consumers speaking up can make a difference. By demanding stricter standards and more transparency, we can help make sure that the food we're eating is truly safe and healthy.
It's about pushing for a system that puts public health before corporate profits.
Well said.
We've covered a lot today, from tips for shopping to the complexities of food regulations.
It is a lot to take in, but hopefully people feel like they have some control over this.
Absolutely. We can make informed choices, advocate for change, and support groups that are fighting for a healthier food system. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's shift gears a bit and talk about some practical things we can do to specifically lower our exposure to Red 40. Okay, so we know to check labels and try to eat mostly whole foods. But what about those times when you just, want something a little more fun? What if I'm craving a red velvet cake? Am I doomed?
Yeah, not at all. There are actually tons of natural food dyes out there that can give your food color and even add some extra nutrients.
Really? I could make a red velvet cake without Red 40.
You bet. For reds and pinks, you can use things like beet juice, paprika, or even just crushed raspberries. They'll give that beautiful red color without any artificial stuff.
Wow, I never knew you could use things like that.
Oh yeah, natural dyes are super versatile. For yellows and oranges, turmeric and saffron are great. And for green, you can use spirulina, which is a type of algae. Gives a really vibrant green color.
Spirulina in a cake? That's kind of wild.
It might sound strange, but spirulina is actually loaded with nutrients. Protein, antioxidants, some vitamins.
So it's not just about avoiding the bad stuff, it's about getting some good stuff in there too.
Exactly. Choosing natural dyes means you're cutting down on artificial ingredients and adding some extra nutrition.
Okay, I'm convinced. I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for natural dyes from now on. But what if I just can't find anything? Any other ways to lower my exposure to Red 40?
Well, you can always keep an eye on portion sizes. If you do have something with Red 40 in it, try not to go overboard.
Moderation, right?
Always a good idea. And remember, everyone is different. Some people might be more sensitive to these artificial dyes than others. If you notice anything weird after eating something with Red 40 digestive issues, skin problems, it's worth talking to your doctor.
It's like with any food sensitivity, you have to pay attention to what your body's telling you.
Exactly. And if you're worried about your kid, definitely talk to their pediatrician.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. The science, the tips for avoiding Red 40. What's the big takeaway you hope people get from this?
I think the biggest thing is that we have a choice. The more we know about what's in our food, the better choices we can make for ourselves and our families.
I totally agree. This isn't about scaring anyone. It's about empowering people.
That's right. And remember, we've just scratched the surface here. There's a whole lot more to explore and learn about food additives.
So stay curious, ask questions, don't be afraid to push back a little.
And if it feels overwhelming, don't worry. Even small changes can make a difference.
I like that. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We hope you learned something new and feel ready to make some healthy choices.
It's been great talking with you.
Until next time, everyone, stay informed, stay healthy.